Hi everyone, and welcome back to this comprehensive video series covering all things 3D modelling in Clip Studio Paint. If you haven't seen the previous videos in this series, please check them out so you can catch up with us. And with that being said, let's continue. Before we get into the LT conversion, actually just going to turn this off, because I like having an actual 3D version of what we're going to be converting. So I know my shortcut is Ctrl-Alt-L to open up this menu. However, if you don't have that set up, just go to Layer and Convert to Lines and Tones. And we will bring up this very complicated, if you don't know what you're looking at, menu. So we're going to keep Preview off for the minute, and we're going to untick these boxes just so I can go through every single thing and show you how altering any of these settings will affect the drawing. So now we can turn the preview on, and we're going to get a very basic LT conversion. It'll just be an L conversion because we haven't ticked the tone button yet. And as you can see, it's not looking the best. That's still pretty amazing for a computer program to be able to do that, but we can make it better. So let's go through every one of these one by one. The first two is under the Extract Line submenu, and the first one under that is the raster layer. When you do line tone conversion, you can choose between whether your lines will be a flat image, as in a raster, or an editable vector layer. I choose vector layer every time, simply because we want that freedom that we were seeing before, where we can alter the size and the texture. You can sometimes get funny lines when it comes to vectors. You'll see what I mean when I start the conversion. However, like I said, the best thing about vectors is they can be edited much easier than raster layers, and vectors can also be converted into raster layers much more easily than the other way around. You will get better results converting a vector to a raster versus a raster to a vector. So let's select vector. And as you can see straight away, vectors, very thin lines and a little bit more mechanical, I would say, a bit sterile. As you can see, the bear is less round, but again, we can fix that. The next option is line width, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Simply the size of the line. So big arrows jump up by 10, so we can get some thick boys right there. Little arrows by 1, so we can go all the way to 50. I'm going to keep it about 10, maybe a little less. You can use these arrows and this slider, or you can just enter the value yourself. Just be warned it doesn't go past 50, so you'll get this pop-up. And like I said, vector making some weird kind of patterns there, although you get that with raster too, it's almost unavoidable. Now that I like the line width, the next one is accuracy of detection, and what that means is simply how much detail is the program going to detect in the 3D model, and how many lines is it going to extract from that. So if we go all the way to 100, this one goes to 100, but you'll see how incredibly detailed it gets. There you go. So it's a bit messy. We go down to 90, that, and as you can see, the more we go down, the less detail will be available in the drawing. So depending on what model you use, it can be different. I tend to believe the lower you go, the better the results, but it's not always true. So all I do every time is just play around. The clock is absolutely effed up. We've got some weird lines going on here. If we drag it all the way up, you can see how distorted all of that is. It's generally not advised to go all the way to 100. For me, I like to do generally the lowest, or maybe 10, because I can always delete these later or add my own lines later. The next is adjust accuracy according to scale. This just means that the bigger an object, the more accurate it will be. So if we tick that, it's going to change just a bit. I don't tend to like this option very much. It takes away a bit of the detail. As you can see there, it's all gone. Here it comes back, better windows, etc. Emphasize outline does just that. The outlines of objects will be thicker. You can't see it on the preview, but when you press OK, it will definitely show. I don't really tend to use it all that much. If I do, it'll probably just be 10. The second category, under depth, is just what it sounds like. You can alter how thick or thin the lines are depending on the depth of the model. So say if we have depth clicked, we can alter the graph here to make it so that lines at the front are thicker than lines at the back to give us a sense of depth. If I drag it all the way here, most of these lines disappear because we've said very low line width for the front, but we want it thick at the front. You can reset the graph. This is the default, so as you can see, it's absolutely useless. What I like to do is I like to have strong, thick lines at the front, drag this one into the middle, and then have these a bit higher, generally at the top. Either that or I just don't have it selected at all and all the lines are uniform. Now looking at that, it's a bit thick, so I want to go down. Yeah, just a little bit. If you have depth selected and you click apply only to outer layer, it will only affect the outer layer of each object. And that can be nice, I suppose, because you've got the inner lines are not affected by depth, but the outer lines are, so that can be a nice way. I think I'll keep it like that. Smooth can do just that, and that is to smooth out the objects. It can cause some irregularities that I'm not a fan of, but they are good for organic objects such as pillows, blankets, the teddy, and such. And you can change the amount, so you'll see the bed head change, so it's more flat. And if we go up, it will warp. And if you notice, the bedside table will also warp, and that's not what we want. So I would only do smoothing with human models, clothes, pillows, that sort of thing, soft material based objects. Otherwise, I would just leave it unchecked. Hi guys, sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video and it's helping you, please give it a like and a share so others can find it. What helped you might help someone else. If you could also subscribe, that'd be great too. There'll be plenty of videos in this series, so click that big black button below so you don't miss a single one. If you have any questions, pop them down in the comment section below and I'll answer them as best I can. Now that we've done the left side of the menu, let's focus on the right, which is a bit more complicated. The first option is Extract Line of Texture. And that simply means if you tick this option, the program will take into account the color, lighting, and texture maps of the model. So this is where you will see your black fill, meaning these darker parts of the model, things in shade, will become black if we choose that option. A lot of these models come with texture, but I've actually turned it off. These ones I don't believe you can turn them off, hence why they are still coloured. If you have a texture, say that this cabinet was a very dark kind of mahogany grain, it will affect the extract line of texture. If you're looking for a plain as model as can be, you will want to make sure that your models are grey or have no texture if possible. However, if you do want that texture, then go right ahead and keep the color or the map of the model on. So let's go ahead and click Extract Line of Texture. And straight away we can see that the curves of the pillow and the curtains and some of the seams and folds in the bag. Posterization means it's in the name. Think of those posters that were quite popular in the 70s. So you'll see what I mean when I tick it. There you go. It creates lines where the shadows are. So I generally ignore this. It can make for some cool art, so if you actually want this effect in a drawing, then go right ahead, but most of the time I just ignore it. Second one is pretty obvious. It's including black into the process, so if we click it, a lot of the shadows will appear. Now this is great for manga work. I wouldn't say it's the best for colored work, however, you can actually create selections based on what's on a layer. It might be good for creating a selection to color later. However, for manga work, black and white work, this is great. You can get some great effects. If you increase it really far, you might get a nighttime kind of effect. So let's drag it up pretty high. I think it goes all the way to 200. As you can see, if we added grey or tones over the white parts, this might appear like a bedroom in darkness in the middle of the night, say. This is really up to you and the lighting that you want. I tend to stick under 100 at least when it's a day scene or a brightly lit interior scene. The bag was a dark blue colour, so it's gone black. We go all the way to 0. It doesn't actually go away completely, so you can always just untick it to get rid of that. But let's go 20. We can always delete this back later, so don't stress too much. The next option is line width, and that just affects the shadows here and increases how thick they are. So the higher you go, the darker those shadows are going to become. Most of the time I completely ignore this because I use tone work to shade more than the line extraction. The next option is process of edge detection. This is just how the program detects the extra lines. So again, we can get rid of that. These are the baselines, these are the extra lines. So the first process of edge detection is number 1. And 1 is better for, I would say, less detailed models. So we don't have many super detailed models here right now. I'd say maybe the lamp and the clock, maybe even the bag. We can extract them separately later and change these settings, which I will show you. However, right now, 1 is good. I will go through both so you can see the difference. However, we're just going to go through 1 for now. Edge threshold is essentially the value between complete detection and no detection. So we increased this all the way to the top. All these grey lines are going to disappear. Now this is great if you just want the black fill, so you don't want any of that grey. You can bring this up all the way to the top and get rid of that shadow. Or you can just go through and see what you like, what you don't like. I don't like those shadows too much, so I usually keep it quite blank, if not get rid of them completely. I'm going to stick to 65. Direction of detection has to do with lighting. So if you get rid of all these, depending on where the light is shining, it will detect something. Generally, it's wise to have them all ticked. However, if certain models look better without them. So just again, most of this is trial and error, just playing around with what you think looks good. Now we're going to change it from 1 to 2. And we get a few more options when we do that. Edge height, if you think of an actual 3D object, so pick up your phone in your hand and imagine there's a line art going around it. The height of the edge is going to make the line more obvious, thicker, etc. So that's the same kind of principle. The higher the number, the more detail you will get. It doesn't generally affect the image that much. I'm looking at it now and I can't see a difference. Like I said, the number 2 is for more detailed models, so it definitely might affect them in a different way than this kind of basic room. Line curvature has a very technical description. It's described as the continuity of the detected line art base on the variation in the line's thickness. The larger the value, the more likely it is to have short segment. Now, I have no idea what jargon means at all, but as you can see, just by manipulating it, we're going to get a very weird kind of result. This could work well for an effect in a drawing, but most of the time, it's pretty useless. Again, it depends on the model and the detail of that model. I don't use 2 very often. I only use number 2 if I can't get number 1 looking right. So number 1 is looking okay for me. There's still a lot we need to edit to make it a bit smoother and nicer. However, I'm liking the result right now. Except for that dang clock. That is so weird right now. But other than that, 1 is looking good. If you can't get 1 to look good just by fiddling around, switch to 2 and play around with the sliders to see what results you can get. Moving on to tone work, which is generally where the magic happens. Even if you're doing colored work, you'll want to stick around because there are tricks that you can use for coloring even though these are tones. The first thing we want to do is give it a tick, and straight away you'll notice that nothing has really changed at all, as you can see. However, changes are afoot. So right now it may just look grey, but if we clicked that OK button right now, every single grey part on this canvas would turn into a tone. Now, if you don't know what tones are, there are plenty of tutorials on them online, but essentially it is a way of printing manga specifically, but a lot of other things like newspapers, older comics, entirely in black and white by using tiny dots, almost like stippling, to create a grey effect. So every single time you read a manga that looks like it has grey in it, it's technically not grey. It's millions of little tiny dots spaced out according to the shade of grey. So darker things will have the dots much closer together, and lighter things like this grey will have them very far apart. And our brain does a cool thing and it tricks us into believing that we are seeing grey instead of tiny little black dots. And it just saves printers a lot because it's more expensive to print grey because it will require mixing and colour, etc., than it is just to print tiny, weeny little black dots. Now, if we clicked OK, the tones would be formed into this 3D-esque kind of shading. However, that can look very 3D in a comic or a drawing, especially if you're trying for more of a 2D kind of look. So our best friend is going to be posterization, and you'll see what I mean by that when I click it. And there we are. So posterization does essentially shading in layers. So you can see the different kind of tones that appear here. If I drag that further up, more of it will be shaded. This white part represents how much white is represented. If we drag 40 up, it'll be darker. And if we drag 60 up, it's going to be even darker. You can keep doing this. You can keep adding more and more, make it super dark. Generally, I like 3, and even sometimes 3 is too much. Sometimes 2 is enough. The way you get rid of these little arrows is just by dragging them off the little bar here. So I don't want 97 or 98. Tone work is actually based on the strength and direction of the lighting of your canvas. So if you turn preview off, you can see that this pillar right here has a lot of light coming down on it. And when we get the toning back up, it doesn't have many shadows because of that reason. But you can also see that the bag here is a dark color. The window and the curtains are quite dark. So when we are toning, it also mimics that, as well as black fill. We always have to have one on. To add more, all we have to do is go down to the bottom part of the bar, and you'll see the mouse change from the arrow to this little crosshairs with a plus. Just click one, and you'll get it. These numbers right here refer to the density. So like before, I was talking about how a darker tone will have more black dots closer together. The density is more. That's what I'm referring to. So if I make one here, 8, I think it's DPI. So literally there will be 8 dots per inch on the page. I'm not entirely sure if that's correct, but essentially you can think about it that way. So this shade right here has 26 dots. 60 is generally the highest I would go. Otherwise, just make it black. Normally, you should increase in increments of 10 or 5. 26 would be a no-no. I would make it 20 and 40. So we've got a nice kind of 20-20 balance going right here. I'd have that quite low. I don't think I would go over 50% for tones in a light scene. What you can do for tones right now, so as I said, they're dots. Tones are dots, which means right here it says circle, essentially a dot. However, we can actually change that. We can make it noise, which is just crazy kind of static TV looking. You can change it to asterisk, cherry, flower, and that's a segue into the next, which is frequency. And that is basically how often the dots or the shape, whatever shape you choose, appears. So if you have the frequency really low, you can change it to the point where you can actually visibly see the dot. If I had it on 10 right now, all these tones would almost appear like a polka dot pattern, like visible, actual visible dots. This is a great way of creating patterns, because if we selected flower or heart and then we had the frequency really low, we actually see visible hearts, meaning we could actually put that on a t-shirt or as a bedspread right here. Generally, if you're using it to shade, as in you want it to appear grey, like a shading, the frequency is either 50 or 60 for a standard manga page, and the angle is generally 45. You want the frequency and the angle to be consistent across every single tone layer that you have. And I mean that only for shading. Obviously, if you want to make the pattern like we discussed before with hearts, etc., you can change it up. However, if you change these when you're just using it for shading, you will get a weird, annoying effect called moiré, which means it creates an optical illusion where the tone will start showing patterns like squares and circles and all kinds of weird stuff that you don't want. Especially if you have tones overlapping. Like you see, these tones are on top of each other. So this grey one is the lowest, this is the middle, and this tiny bit is the highest in terms of layer order. If they are all different frequencies and they are all different angles, you will 100% get moiré. You want them all to be 50 and 45. If that is the frequency and the angle that you use on page 1 of your comic, then that is the frequency and angle you will use in all pages of your comic. Again, this does not apply if you are making a pattern. Just be warned that you will get weird effects if you mess with the frequency and angle on different layers. The density, as in how dark they are, can be changed all the time. Obviously, if you have a character with red hair and you want to tone it 60, you would want to keep it 60 throughout your comic. You don't want to mess around with that because that'll change the look of your character. However, if you want to shade, placing a 60 on top of a 40 in terms of layers will not affect the tones in any way the way frequency and angle will. So just be warned, keep frequency angle consistent for shading. Density can change, and also the type should remain the same. If I have circle for the 20 density layer, but for this one, I change it to square, again, you're going to get the Moira effect, and it's not fun. So these three things should remain the same for shading purposes. They can be altered for pattern purposes, and density can change all the time. I reckon I'm pretty done with that, so let's go ahead and click OK. This might take a little while, depending on your computer. And there you go. You might be able to see the tone layers now. If we zoom in, you can actually see the dots. All right. And while this looks like a fish, actually, it's meant to be a dot, but like you can see the difference of how spaced apart they are and how big the dots are. And that's it for this video, so please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you have any questions, pop them down in the comments section below and I'll answer them as best I can. Don't forget to like and share, and thank you for watching. Bye!